To me, it feels miraculous that I finish playing like however many hours of single player content in Shadowbringers, like 30, 20 something, 30, of just I am leveling, but I'm not leveling. I'm never leveling. I'm never thinking.
You're playing a story in a game.
Yeah, I'm playing through a story, and then at the end of that story, I am level 80. I've had an incredible experience.
Keep in mind that Matt's favorite game of all time is a single player RPG. So, like, when he says he feels like he's just playing a story, he's rewarded with a max level character, that's very different than somebody like me that is there for gameplay first and narrative second in an MMO specifically.
30 hours of this shit is absolutely incredible.
Actually, that's a big point because it ties into a super actually. From Stephen Williams with the recent Realm Reborn revamp that came with the Shadowbringers patches. Every friend I have who didn't like ARR made new characters and like it now. That's likely my situation because I've not done a single side quest.
Not liking ARR the first time or liking the ARR first time, in my mind, has no bearing on if you like it the second time because it has different context. If you watched the 3 oldest Star Wars movies and then you felt they were outdated and kind of old, you might feel differently about those stories if you went and saw all of the other Star Wars movies. If you thought The Hobbit was really slow, you might not like it until you viewed it as a prequel to The Lord of the Rings. It is not uncommon for you to like something once it has more context than it did when it was originally released. ARR for me was too slow the first time, but I'm appreciating it now. But that does not mean I regret not liking it the first time. I know things now that I didn't know then. And so I am introduced to characters, concepts, places, timelines that have meaning to me, but the story hasn't told me about that meaning. I have that because I'm from the future.
Just following the MSQ and the Archer quest line. That's all I'm doing. I mean, I think you have to follow the Archer one.
Yes, you do.
And it's been great.
Yes, Rezo in chat says that it's Nier. He's literally wearing a Nier necklace, it looks like. Loves Nier.
So I think for a whole bunch of people who maybe saw the initial ARR maybe a year or two ago, it seems like it's way, way, way better now.
Yeah, but it's the idea of this being the single player RPG, and then at the end of it, you're like, oh, here's an MMO.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, the MMO is fully featured. It has loads of community stuff.
I don't like that phrasing because some people don't want a single player RPG in their MMO. If you do, that's great. The way that it is introduced in the beginning of every expansion is when they list a feature list on a slide at the first opening event officially announcing the expansion after they've played a trailer. The very first feature that they list is that a feature of the game is that it includes an entire single player RPG worth of story in the initial base content release of the game. That is a feature, just like raids are a feature, just like dungeons are a feature, just like different class design is a feature. And so while that feature is required to play through, it's not required that you come to it for that reason. So I think for people that like single-player RPGs, it's a really appropriate phrasing because of how prominent it is to say, hey, it's a single-player RPG, and then at the end, you're released into this MMO. But for people that just want to get to the MMO, you're not focusing on the right part of what that player's looking to get out of the game. It is an MMO. You're going to have to play through an RPG first. Both of those statements are true. Know your audience. Right? You talk differently to a person you're dating than you do your parents. Not because you're lying to one of them, but because you know your audience, even if you're presenting the same information. Right? If I think my wife looks beautiful, I'm going to say that very differently to her, possibly, than the way I might describe her to her father. It's the same idea. I think my wife is beautiful. That's the core idea. Right? Those are two different audiences. And you need to be respectful of the fact that one may not appreciate the way you said it to the other.
It has loads of features you can do to engage with the community. You can have your free company housing. You can get your own apartment. You can go stand in the street as a bard and play music on the guitar they recently added, or any number of instruments. You can play them yourself with your buttons, or you can plug in a program to play them for you. Just play music for you. You can go do your your savage difficulty stuff, where you go get a party of 8 and go, right, this is we're going to spend a couple hours trying to progress this tonight. You can go do that. You can go do everything else an MMO can offer. essentially, but it just comes at the end of this. It comes at the end of this incredible single player experience, with some of the MMO bits, combat wise, like placed through, and you just turn around and go, "I'm in this world."
I'm in an MMO.
Yeah, you're like, I'm in. Oh, it feels like the MMO part of the game takes place inside this incredible single player game, in a sense. Instead of them being like neither hurt for the other.
Yeah.
And that's what's amazing about it for me.
It's so interesting to listen to two people that love lore talk to each other. Imagine you're sitting on a bus, coming back from a convention you went to, and you're listening to two people behind you talk about how excited they are about going to the same convention, but they went for a different set of reasons than you. It's just a different reality. It's just it's not any better or worse than mine. It's just interesting listening to them talk to each other about what they get from this game, what they look for from this game. MMOs in particular are very broad, and what people get, there is not one right way. As long as you're not hurting anybody else's experience, and if you're having fun, if it's worth what you're paying out of your budget, it's fine. It's great. And so it's just interesting anytime I find myself being exposed to, people that are RPing in the community, or people who lore comes first, or people who glamour comes first, or people who only savage raid, or people who are here for the PvP, because none of those describe me.
I feel like these two, what you kind of imagine as very distinct things, blend together perfectly, and like it's better than the sum of its parts as a result. And that's why people love it so much, I think. Completely insane.
There's a few supers I think just to make sense to cover now, because people actually, it's FF stuff.
Yep.
Nino of Last Unicorn mentioned, remember to go back to key NPCs every now and then after big events. Their dialogue will update as things change in the world.
Oh yeah, of course. Because it's single player.
That's so alien to me in a world where, normally it's like everything is siloed off in its own time zone, with how the WoW stuff goes. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, the whole world, like it is a single player game in that sense of it's not like, oh, this is the old stuff, don't think about it.
It's not any different than phasing in WoW. Sometimes the character literally moves, sometimes the city changes. It's not any different than phasing, and you can't go back to previous phases. There are sometimes that an entire zone has a timeline shift, in which case you can choose which timeline you're in. Which is a later addition, and is why in Cataclysm, when they deleted all the vanilla stuff, it's a bummer and it's a loss, and it's part of the interest in WoW Classic is there's things that are gone, like 1.0. And so for Final Fantasy players, it's not any different than phasing. When you're going back and talking to those people, they have different things to say, but there are a lot more dialogues. There are, so you may find yourself following a character across a zone where that character is appearing and then meeting you at various places, but they could also just be in the same spot, changing as the phase changes.
It's out systematized. It's just, oh yeah, here's other stuff.
Yeah, there was... there's another one from Killian Duggan who said, in FF you actually build relationships with other characters, especially the Scions. In WoW you have no personal stake in the NPCs. It feels lonely.
That is an aggressive statement, and not even remotely fair of how people feel about Sylvanas and about, our various warlords of the Horde, and about the family, the royal family of the Alliance, and about places like Darnassus. That is not even remotely fair, and huge portions of the Shadowlands pay tribute to all of the various NPCs we've had relationships with, bosses we have killed, NPCs that have died along our side. We are getting a chance to see other sides to them, getting a chance to explore how they feel after the fact. That is not remotely fair of character development that happens within that. I do not think that is a fair comparison. The amount of story in each expansion of Final Fantasy is more than the cohesive campaign quest. That's a new thing in WoW. What the Shadowlands campaign quest is the current iteration of something they've been working on over 9 expansions, and right now is about, from a amount of story standpoint, where things like ARR were, with writers that maybe didn't come from as dense of a background. And so yes, they don't have as much, But to say that players are not connected to things, you're not spending any time in forums talking about what people are feeling about the various characters of recent expansions. You're not talking about what people get plenty upset over WoW lore, and that's because they care about those characters. They are different, but to say one is there and the other is not present at all is just not fair.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting thing, because I've spent quite a bit of time with Thrall and Jaina and, you know, all of these people. And I'm like, my character's not really treated as one of the gang. I'm just like this sort of cold, detached champion, Mawwalker, or whatever. So, you know,
So talking about character as character being us, I heard character the first time as character like NPCs. When you talk about character like us, I don't think either game addresses us very well. The Warrior of Light in Final Fantasy is often treated more as a tool to point and aim at things than somebody that really has agency over what they're doing or even understanding of what they're doing. We are not exposed to, until fairly recent expansions, even why and who the various voices in our life have been and what their objectives are, what their origin is, and we haven't known. And we've done this stuff anyway. Some of the dungeons, the lore behind the dungeons is incredibly questionable what we're doing. And yet we go in there and we slay the bosses because we're told to. And so I don't feel that the development is wildly deep in the same way that I can explore in a single player, where there's all of this ability to dive deep, closer to something like a D&D type thing, where I can make choices in Elder Scrolls, a single player game, that affect the world and affect my place in it. The Warrior of Light, no matter when you start this game, you're going to end at the end of Shadowbringers right now. You start today, you start at an ARR, you end at the same place. There's not development per se of uniquely you, and so the depth is entirely your perception. You and I are seeing the same movie and you feel differently walking out of it. But it is absolutely two-dimensional in that the writers decided the development of my character, and it can only be so deep because all characters have to get to the same place. World of Warcraft is the exact same thing, but instead of being the tool that's being worshipped as this one thing, you're one of an army. And so it's just as anonymous. It's a different lens of the same view, but it's just as anonymous. I'm just the champion. It's fine. And as we've gotten to be, this slayer of gods over various expansions, as any MMO can struggle from, where you get to where it's like, oh wow, you killed the bad guy and then the bad guy's boss, and then the place where the bad guy's boss gets his power, and then the god of that, and then the creator of that god, and then the protector of those creators. Like, eventually your character gets so anonymously powerful that all of the lore starts to feel a little bit silly unless you start to give it reason and purpose, which is what, in theory, the Shadowlands is supposed to do. It's supposed to tell us what happens when we die. What is going on here? What is the relationship between life and death that we as characters seem to have this weird relationship with, because I die and then I get to go back and pull the boss again. What's happening? And with Endwalker, as we wrap up Shadowbringers, we start to question, where does our character come from? Who's giving us these powers to be the Warrior of Light? As far as like lore-wise, what is our origin point? Without spoiling anything for either game, what is the reason we're here? What is the thing driving us? And we're learning a lot about that. And so Endwalker is this big finale of that. But a lot of that depth in character development is your own personal understanding of the world, not your actual individual characters. Your individual character really has a couple of dialogue options, and they always end up in the same space. So I don't personally consider that depth. I think that, especially if you're comparing the entirety of Final Fantasy to the entirety of World of Warcraft. Now, in recent expansions, in Shadowlands, I feel more attached to my character. When I have a quest from Lady Sylvanas, and any of you that have never played WoW don't even know who that is, and they say various things at the start of that quest, and after I complete that quest they make some offhand statements. I felt that my character became deeper, had a place in the world. I had impacted something. When I go into Revendreth and I interact with some of these NPCs on these quests, all of a sudden these things that I thought, it didn't really matter, I did it because I had to. No. I had a very distinct impact on their life. I had an incredibly distinct impact on their life. And Shadowbringers does the same thing. It brings things into focus that had been there the whole time. But as a player through ARR, meh. And so that's why it was so easy for me to skip story. And as I'm playing through ARR now, I still feel that way. So I have this knowledge. But without, if I from my head say, okay, you're not allowed to use any example of any knowledge you know from Shadowbringers, then why am I in the starting zone? Well, there's some guys that are having trouble running their farm and you got to do that. Like, we need somebody that can kill this thing. I don't feel my character has depth. I feel my character has a purpose. The depth is added later. The depth is added with your relationship with not only the character, but this third person view of the world as a whole. Final Fantasy has more of it, but to the statement as I heard it, and I can go back here, the statement as I heard it was Final Fantasy has it, binary, yes, no, and World of Warcraft does not. I think it's much more of a sliding scale. And I think single-player RPG games can blow the doors off the right end of that scale. And a round-based MOBA, you know, can be all the way down at the other end where things just don't necessarily need to have lore. And something like Overwatch has to go back and be like, oh, crap, we have to add this. In between is where MMOs live. And Final Fantasy lives much closer to this end than World of Warcraft, but to say it doesn't belong on the scale, I just don't think is fair.
I haven't actually fully got into any of the Scion stuff yet. I think that's been teased to me, these Warriors of the Light and all that stuff. I'm interested to see what that feels like in my own character before I draw my own conclusions, but certainly, yeah, in WoW, it's felt like they've struggled a little bit in kind of ingratiating the player character to those NPCs. Now, that was never a problem in the past because you, the player, really weren't that important.
Yeah, you weren't.
You were just a band of adventurers. So it seems like there's maybe a few things to learn about there.
Yeah, whereas in FF, you start off as an adventurer, and people are like, who's this cunt? Who's this guy? What's going on here? What are you doing here? And then you're like, well, I'll give you a hand. And then there is like a plot reason you're like important. A little bit you're blessed with
the crystal stuff.
Yeah, you're one of Heidel's chosen, but ultimately that doesn't matter. It's not like chosen one, we need you. It's like, oh yeah, you're the strong one. One for the crack. And then, you know, you meet other people doing stuff because naturally you're drawn to problems.
Yeah.
You're strong. Other people are drawn to problems. You solve problems. You end up following along for a while, and suddenly, like, characters speak to you like, you know, I'm trying to...
He's describing both games. I do quests where, hey, we got a bear problem. We got a carrot problem. We got... And you're growing in fame and all of that. The difference is that in Final Fantasy, you get off the boat or the caravan or whatever, depending on your starting city, as an adventurer. In World of Warcraft, if you back way up, you actually start in like a starting city that's appropriate for your race, and you have an origin point. So you start prior to that moment, prior to becoming an adventurer. Is one of my frustrations as I've gotten into WoW lore is I wanted to go back when I got to the end of Shadowbringers, and I can only go back to the beginning of ARR, and I have questions that take place before that.
I think of when it was, but there is a point in time where, like, characters show genuine concern for your character, and in a way that you're like, oh, my character belongs in this world. It is one of these people.
God, that leads on to Dastil Super, who said my character in FF feels more real than my WoW character. My FF character has small decisions that she makes and people that interact with her on a personal level.
Yeah.
Which, I guess it's that sort of thing. In WoW, it's a stay a while and listen vignette.
Yeah.
That you just kind of, you stand there, you listen to two people have a conversation that are Blizzard's characters and the story Blizzard wants to tell with them.
And yet people are mad that in Shadowlands that they had to pick a covenant because their character couldn't be in all of the covenants because the covenant that they wanted to be tied to narratively, to be the champion of, didn't have the effect on the battle system that they wanted. They have choices that matter.
Is it perhaps more the case in FF that like a lot more of that... Actually, do you know what I think it fundamentally is, right? And this is a core thing to writing. In FF... it is basically all framed as conversations between you and people. And yes, you actually can pull off something that feels like a conversation, even though you do not speak a word. So that's something that's been done in role-playing games with silent protection.
I mean, just to name, I think that the Night Fae or whatever, the Ardenweld Covenant story, I feel important and I feel spoken to individually. I feel that I matter. If you have touched the Covenant system and you have not done the one in Ardenweld, I encourage you to do so. There is humor, there is scale, there is drama, there is a part where you matter, there is a part where you are part of this, kind of taking this place. If you know any WoW lore at all, it has these incredible callbacks. Yes, I think Final Fantasy has a strength in story, but what I don't like about these comparisons is that the moment something is weaker than, it's not, hey, Final Fantasy is better than this. It's like Final Fantasy has this and World of Warcraft doesn't. It doesn't have it at all. And that's just not fair. It's what many WoW players, they're like, yeah, well, you don't have, there's nothing that WoW has that Final Fantasy doesn't have anything related to. Well, we have 10 mythic fights. Great, we have 4 savage fights. Well, you don't have PvP. We do have PvP. We don't want it to be your primary focus because there are many times that it's not the focus of the content cycle. And so the queue times can be very long because the majority of the player base doesn't spend a ton of their time engaging with it. But it's not that we don't have it. So on a scale, what I don't like is that it's become binary. There can't be, this game has more of this than this. It has to be, this game has it, and so this game just doesn't. Get it out of here. It's not even comparable. That's just not fair. You can't say WoW doesn't have lore. You can't say Destiny doesn't have lore. Destiny has lore, but it needs somebody like My Name is Bife to expose it to you because the game does such a piss-poor job of showing it to you. But it's there. It's just not drummed into your face like it is in Final Fantasy. I'm not saying it's better. You want to put it on a scale, put it on a scale. But you can't say, well, Destiny doesn't have lore. That's just not true.
Protagonists for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
It works really well in FF.
Yeah.
Whereas for how Blizz does it, it's just kind of like quest log, click, done. And maybe an NPC will talk at you if you're lucky and you're playing the content that's like, a little bit more effort's being put in. So I think doing that via, conversations, I think is a pretty big thing.
There's another
download the immersion add-on for World of Warcraft.
Yeah. There's another thing that helps that, and that is even though you don't speak for a lot of the game, you do eventually get to make dialogue choices that are specific lines that are really, really good.
Cool.
And really they are like, there are times where you're given a dialogue choice and you're just like, I need to pick what to say. Doesn't matter, but it's what your character would say.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this is important, how I address this person with their problem or whatever else.
I mean, even little bits of lampshading like that work.
Maybe the pre-patch events didn't matter to them going to BFA. Maybe the Darnassus event and the Lordaeron event just didn't have any impact on them. I think I teared up at the Darnassus event. The Lordaeron event made my gut drop. I think I took a part in that, and I decided, how involved in this do I want to be? If you were not invested in lore, it was a thing to do and knock out and get your mount. I thought I wasn't invested in lore, so I thought that's what I was doing. And then I got there, and I feel very differently. They literally have 2 World of Warcraft Chronicles in front of them. Bellular literally releases lore videos on his channel. And so I guess what I'm understanding is, why does he feel those are valuable if it's such a crap story? I understand it has room for improvement, but I don't like how dismissive they're being, that the moment they enjoy Final Fantasies, something that literally puts food on him and all of his employees' table is just total garbage.
Work.
Yeah.
It works because it allows you to roleplay your character and have your character fit what you think it should fit, or how it should be, which is important even if that is not a big, my gameplay will change depending on what choice I make.
Yeah.
So if you just want to discuss it from gameplay, if you just want to discuss it from immersion, that moment, one of the things I will say is different is where you get it. In Final Fantasy, what I often feel is the cutscenes, especially the narrated cutscenes, the cutscenes that in your quest log have a picture, are these moments. They're these moments where, based on the dialogue choice, if you get a dialogue choice, that you feel that things change and you shift. If you skip everything between it, they don't always make a ton of sense. These are the ones replayable in your inn. These moments are where they're there. These are the hit moments where things matter. I think World of Warcraft's is less distinct. I think that it's much more of a feeling you build over time. I said that I didn't know that Darnassus effect would hit me because I don't remember why Darnassus matters as a, do you remember when this was said? Do you remember when this happened? It's that I remember the fact that I was a Night Elf player when I played Alliance, and Darnassus is a place that meant a lot to me. I remember as a druid that it is a place that has a lot of significance. I remember these things about Darnassus. I have interacted with it. I have interacted with night elves, and compared to my interactions with humans, I feel very differently, or gnomes, and I really don't feel as aggressive towards the night elf as a longtime horde player. And so, for me personally, seeing Darnassus have what happened to it happen is something that didn't feel right. It didn't feel okay. It felt disgusting. But not because of one cutscene, not because of one moment. And so these immersions are something that take place over events. The story in Shadowlands ended in a 10-part raid series. You had 10 bosses, and you didn't get the resolution to the story without clearing that raid. Not Eden, where the bosses take place and there's cutscenes before and after that lend lots and lots and lots of context. The bosses themselves are the context. And so it's about this experience. And so simply because I can't name when something happened is one of the problems that we've moved to when we live in this society where 144 characters is how long you have. When people can decide what my YouTube video is about, even though it's 10, 20, 30, 60 minutes long, based on my 150 character title and my limited pixel size thumbnail. They already know. They know everything I feel and everything I am and everything I will ever be based on that limited interaction, because they don't have time to go deeper, because they want to go interact with 1,000 things today, and if they take time on one, they won't have time for the other 999. I get it. We're overwhelmed in society today, but sometimes something is about the experience. It's about the journey. When you look at the news, bad news is often instant. It's tragic. It happens. I can put my finger on it. Where were you when this happened to you? When this happened in front of you? When this happened to somebody you know or a group of people you care about? Where were you when it occurred? It is a moment in time. It is a tragedy. It is a memory. It is distinct. It is not, where were you when over 10 years we decreased the infant mortality rate by a significant percentage in a region? Where were you when we made a dent in child hunger over this amount of time? Or we beat back malaria in this region by making these long sweeping changes? Where was I? It's 10 years. I did all sorts of things. It's not a memory. It's not a moment, but it is still meaningful. It matters. Good news takes time. And so a huge portion of Shadowbringers can be condensed into these moments because they drove us to them. But to say that World of Warcraft doesn't have value because it doesn't have distinct, memorable, exact moments, big payoffs that I can name, that I can clip, that I can put in a reaction, and I can go upload to YouTube and it's 3 minutes long. No, it's about a whole journey. It's about how we got here. It's why frustration with the game can run so deep, because it's not about a single decision that World of Warcraft did wrong. Why is everybody mad at WoW right now? It's not about one thing. It's about chronic, long-running things. It's about disappointment that for many people has happened expansion after expansion after expansion. It's a relationship that lasts this whole time. Because there aren't cutscenes we can all sit around and point to, it doesn't mean there aren't strong feelings. And those strong feelings don't have importance. It's just a different way of getting there.
that never happens, but it doesn't matter because your character's making this choice. And there's a couple of them in Shadowbringers that like they winded me, like having to choose what to say.
Shit.
But even before the dialogue choices come in, just the character's emotes going.
Yeah.
Or in some cases when someone's like, right, let's go fight, and your character just does the default, like, I can't remember what emote it's actually called, but it's like a
yeah. But then
they just do that and nod, and then you're like, yeah, let's go.
Blizz can't do that.
Yeah.
Because whenever a character in WoW does like a nod or a thumbs up, it's not just, yeah, cool, do that. It's right? Like, it's a humongous facial animation. It's all exaggerated. And it's like, it's goofy. Oh, man.
And they didn't set themselves off for the big payoffs. You can't have the big payoffs in Final Fantasy without the build-up. The Shadowbringers 5.0 ending moment, before we went into patches 0.1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, that moment doesn't mean anything if you jump straight there. It doesn't. Who we fight in various dungeons, who we fight in various bosses, this is why they're tied to story, because we have to build up why we're fighting them. But the moments are still distinct. WoW isn't set up to do that. Their art style is not set up to do that. Their narrative style is not set up to do that. And when they try to do it, it feels a little bit goofy. They get memed on for when they try to make something build up to something, because it feels over the top. It feels cheesy. Having a moment where you cry in WoW lore feels like, why are they crying? But in Final Fantasy, you know, you look around at the end of the room and people are like, why are you not crying? Is something wrong with you? And so if you're really invested in both sets of lore, I don't think World of Warcraft is set up for that. And so if we're moving into an era where MMORPGs are expected to deliver that, World of Warcraft has a lot of ground to cover. That was not a requirement back in 2004. And as a result, they did not develop that skill set. And so if that is now a requirement to be defined as a good game, World of Warcraft's in a lot of trouble. There was a time when that was optional. There was a time when that didn't matter. There was a time when real writers didn't have to be on staff for a game to have success. Now, in action movies, it's not uncommon to have somebody on set with real martial arts experience or real special ops training, real police chiefs telling how real things would respond, making that immersion more authentic. But if you go back and watch movies from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was very clear that they did not have experts in the room when they were writing this, when they were, you know, verifying that, okay, this is going to be the final thing, in the editing booth, on set. These things were not there. You know, what makes John Wick meaningful is that Keanu Reeves went and learned to actually shoot like that. That's training that they can go pay for. And so if WoW, due to the fact that it was on top and isolated on this mountain of being the biggest, has missed out on the fact that down here we're now requiring you to have deep and meaningful moments that are delivered in these impactful moments that are written to, that are built up to, and are delivered in these clippable, shareable, discussable moments, the way a season finale of a TV show does it, the way a movie can have something that the trailer centers on and the music can go bum, bum, bum. Like, if we're centered on that moment, World of Warcraft has never had those. It's never been about those. When you talk to people about Classic, it's about the world. It's about the stories. The drama time with Preach is not about, I hopped into the game for the first time and this happened. There's a build-up and then a payoff. But it wasn't done by a writer. It wasn't done by somebody that sat down and storyboarded this out and made choices on this. It happened more organically. So if we are getting to a time where we need something to be so good that it has to be curated, if you've ever listened to TED Talks or podcasts on photographers who lived from the transition from film to digital, they talk about how in film you couldn't see it as you took it. And so there was this beauty to these blemishes, and you got what you got, and a special photo was truly special. As we moved into the age of digital where you could take 10,000 photos to a shoot and see them as you went, perfection became required. Some photographers took that as an opportunity to shift the way they viewed perfection, the way they did art, and digital art made leaps forward. But that left some photographers behind. They weren't ready for, and they didn't want to make that leap, and it's what the market grew to expect. We expect perfection because perfection is available. And so if this curated, perfect story is now a required feature of an MMO to be successful, and it is something that Guild Wars is trying to strive for, and it's something that ESO begins to work on with each of their expansions, and it is something that, the next aspect of Old Republic, or if New World has this, or if new PSO New 2 New Genesis has this, and World of Warcraft is the only one that doesn't, they're going to get left behind in the film era. They're going to get left behind. But to look at these games as an entirety, to view them now, where in the context of this, they have people who are longtime Final Fantasy players saying these comments over the course of 7 years of game content, and they're talking about it from their experience with 15 years of WoW content. You have to realize a vast majority of that is in that film era. ARR was not written with the degree of care and experience that they have now. Even the same writers, if they're still writers that were on staff in ARR and they're on staff now, they have grown in their career. And so if you're talking about the whole thing, you have to be aware that was not always a requirement.
If only they could go back in time to the character revamp of WoW and make it less goofy. Because it is way too goofy for the, I think in a bunch of ways, hardcore genocide including story that they want to tell. And we have these super goofball characters. It's like, look at Jaina and how she, like, her face moves. You're like, Jaina, you're a goofball. Why do you sound like that?
Why are you crying? Why are you crying while going?
Yeah,
it's really awkward,
it's all that crying animation they play, and it's like, man, and the thing about those WoW animations is they work pretty well for an NPC emote in an MMO because you're viewing it from far away. That's why they are so exaggerated. It's something you will get when you have actors who are super used to performing in a theater context, and you move them into film and TV. So in theater, they're performing to an audience that is farther away, right? So often in theater you find that like actors they're really very expressive with their body, and sometimes they will then struggle with a little bit of like some of the subtlety and stuff that goes on when it's in TV and it's all like up really close. I think it's a similar thing that can kind of happen with
that's a great comparison.
With WoW, right? Where it's like those emotes are designed for one context, and then we pull the camera, we put it up close. Well, now we're using the same emotes, but not in the context that the designers initially made them for.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing.
That's really the core issue here, right? Is the game has changed, and the problem with long-running titles is you made decisions, 10 years ago to get where you are today, and you couldn't see 10 years into the future. And so there are plenty of times in both of these games where there are decisions that were made, well-intentioned, well thought out for their time, and they turn into being used for and becoming something very different. This has been very heavily narrative focused as we've talked about them, and so narrative that's why I found myself defending WoW, because when you talk about narrative, Final Fantasy is the heavyweight in the ring. They are. They typically swing better, they swing further, they swing more often. They are the stronger fighter. I wouldn't bet on WoW in any narrative comparison. At the beginning of a narrative comparison video, I would never put my money on WoW. Be excited to see them win a few, because I like the underdog, but they're not going to. They're going to get beat a lot. But 14 has its weaknesses. It has things that it can't do because of choices that were made in the past. And so he makes a great point. Like, it was not designed to be what they're now trying to get out of it. It was not designed to be that thing. A ton of the lore for World of Warcraft isn't in the traditional leveling experience. It's something you have to go seek out. It's something you have to find. On one hand, it can be really rewarding that you have to go find something, that it's this act of discovery instead of being spoon-fed to you through a forced campaign quest. On the other hand, it's really easy to miss it because it's hidden. It's locked away. It's hard to process. It's hard to put it all to pieces together. What order do these quests happen in? What order do I play the zones in? What order do the expansions really need to be enjoyed in? What lore is missing from the expansions? And is that present in media outside of the game? That's not clear, and it takes people helping make fun of it. That make sense of it is the right word. Couldn't find my words. So like somebody like Noble87 has a much bigger job to do, a much harder job to do, to come up with those connections, than somebody in Final Fantasy. And so in Final Fantasy, that gives somebody of the same talents, of the same goal, the ability to much easier dive much deeper and get much further into speculation, get much further into guessing, get much further into how these technologies work and things like that, because the basis, the foundational portion of the lore has already been handed to them. They can go back and they're in and they can rewatch them. They can go back with New Game Plus and they can re-experience them, and it's literally right there. The quests are labeled. It's very easy to get to. And so somebody like Ethis Asher or Anonymous, the two prominent lore experts in the 14 community, they have the ability to start talking about, like, well, how does ethereal currents work? How do these various aspects work that in World of Warcraft we got a lot we got to get through before I can start to talk about how these technologies might have originated. We've got a lot of depth to get to. Can you just tell me where the characters came from? Can we just start there? Because I did a bunch of quests as I leveled, and I don't really understand. And so it's just hard. It's just totally different. And I think that if World of Warcraft is trying to move in a direction where they're trying to tell a deeper story, which is something that I think the war campaign in BFA showed they were trying to do. It is something that Shadowlands' main campaign quest is something they're trying to do. There are these moments where they're trying to make a grander story. The reason they're struggling is because they're trying to build something in a world that was about the world. It was never about these big single narratives. It's about this journey. It's about these moments that are happening to these individual quest NPCs. It's about understanding what ravages an entire zone, about the relationships between these various races. How did the Horde come to be? And once the Horde came into the space, what happened to the local population? When they were displaced, do they fight back? Are there ongoing wars between them? These moments. And we tackle those in 14. There are conflicts, but they're much closer to tackling something in a single-player narrative where I'm at this big battle. I'm there to swing the tide. It's not something that I show up and I do my quests in that zone and the battle was going on before I got there, and lore-wise, the battle will continue after I leave. And so I think for me, not as a lore expert in either game, but as somebody that takes part in both of these games, when I play World of Warcraft, I feel that I am part of this world, in some expansions more so than others. And I feel that I'm here to take part in my place in it, and I am a person walking through it. Much like visiting a foreign country, you're there to observe, you're there to take part in, you're there to learn and grow in what you mean to it. In Final Fantasy, I feel much more like, don't worry, help is here. And so it is a different context. It is a different tone. Everything is about me. Everything. Even when it's not about me, it's because they're like, well, we didn't know it was, we thought it wasn't about you. And actually, turns out it's about you. And so it often feels like, don't worry, you guys made a mess of this. I'm here to sort it out. Doesn't matter if you've lost your kid. I'm the only person that can find him. Doesn't matter if you're struggling with a god. I'm the only one that can slay him. And everything in between, you can't do anything without me. And it's a different relationship with the world. People are in awe of you regularly because you are the warrior of light, and it gets really hard. How do I register the way we deal with other players? How do I deal with the fact that there are different shards, different parallel universes within this space? How do I deal with that? Becomes complex because I'm supposed to be so important. It's why as we went into Ishgard Restoration, it was so weird that I showed up and they're like, yeah, grab a hammer, help out. Don't you know who I am? And it was a stark contrast. So I think that when you're comparing these games narratively, it's one of the areas that it gets apples to oranges really fast. The feature list of these games, narrative is a single item on the list, but the size of that item, the priority of that item, the priority of the community in that item, and the satisfaction of the community with that item are very, very different, and it is very apples to oranges. I am not qualified to be the person that breaks down how these games vary narratively. These are my opinions. But I do think that they're both there. As somebody who does not aim to get lore out of MMORPGs, I aim to get my lore out of other forms of media or other types of games. I feel that there's a story being told to me. I feel that I have a reason to be in the world, and I feel that I am important. I feel that my character is important. I feel that my character has a place. I feel differently in those games, but I do have feelings towards both those games. And when events happen in those games, they do matter to me. And I think that it feels silly to me to think that people who can extract narrative out of a game can't find that in a game just because it's weaker. If narrative's so important to you, you should be able to find it in anything. Is my perspective of somebody who is better at reading than me. It's this superhero skill to me, somebody that can read and comprehend. It's something I come from a family of plenty of people in my family read. Some people in my family don't read very well. There's this stark contrast, and I am in that minority in my family who don't read a lot, and it's something that I think I've always viewed people that read a lot and comprehend that as a bit of a mystery to me, a bit of this mystical power they have to go in and extract these worlds from this text that I have to parse and deal with, and for them to have that power and then go into a game that is just developed and as large as World of Warcraft and go, can't find it. Try again? I don't know. That's my opinion on this. Lore is not going to be the area I'm going to do a brilliant job breaking these down. I'm mostly fixed on the gameplay. I understand gameplay is not the only reason these games exist, but I am mostly into them for the gaming, kinda.